Okay, so like when you really get down to it, what drives us as philosophers?
I'd say, yeah, that fundamental need to understand the bedrock of reality. Grapple with those ultimate questions.
Exactly, to sort of figure out like the why behind the what. It's like the core of what we do, isn't it?
Totally. That human yearning to know. It fuels all philosophical inquiry.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're not just like skimming the surface here. We're going deep into this really pivotal moment, actually. The way Aristotle's Metaphysics, that huge text, was received and transformed within the Arabic and Islamic intellectual tradition.
Yeah. It's often seen as this straightforward handoff of Greek thought, but it's so much more dynamic than that.
Way more active, way more creative. It's like this dialogue that unfolded across cultures, across centuries. And, for a philosopher, I think it's especially fascinating to see how it reshapes these core metaphysical concepts that we still grapple with today.
Absolutely. It's about understanding how our very frameworks for thinking about things like being, substance, causality, the divine, how those were constructed and refined through this incredible historical process.
Right. And we've got this amazing tapestry of source material to work with. I mean, the translations themselves, the commentaries that dig into every nook and cranny of Aristotle's ideas, and then these whole new treatises that spring up from this encounter. It's like witnessing a foundational text being not just read, but like actively rethought and rebuilt.
It's a genuine philosophical rebirth in a way. These enduring metaphysical questions, taken up with these fresh perspectives, leading to these really unique innovations that still inform our understanding.
So think of our mission here as like shedding light on how these Arabic and Islamic thinkers didn't just inherit Aristotle's metaphysics, they wrestled with it, they transformed it. And in doing so, they kind of initiated this, what we might call a second beginning for metaphysics.
Yeah, a second beginning. And that's what makes this deep dive so relevant for philosophers today.
Okay, so let's, put on our philosophical investigator hats here for a second and start with that central object of our inquiry, which is Aristotle's Metaphysics. And, it's not just another text that happened to get translated. It held this, really paramount position in the whole transmission of Greek thought to the Arabic-speaking world.
Right, and it's not just about the transmission itself, but the timing. It almost coincides with the very genesis of Arabic philosophy. It's that foundational.
And we're talking centuries of engagement here. I mean, from Al-Kindi's circle, like way back in the 9th century, all the way to Ibn Rushd's massive commentary in the 12th century. Like, that's considered the most extensive commentary on the metaphysics in all of Western philosophical history. And then, of course, beyond that, into the so-called golden age of Islamic philosophy with figures like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina.
Yeah, it's a period of sustained philosophical focus, and it highlights the profound and lasting impact of this text.
And here's where it gets super interesting, I think, for us as philosophers. The very opening of the metaphysics, like Book Alpha Elaton, Chapter 1 in the Arabic ordering, it carried this symbolic weight. It almost becomes a justification for doing metaphysics in a society where, religious authority was pretty dominant.
Right. That opening statement, the one about humanity's desire for knowledge, but also our limitations, it wasn't just a poetic flourish. It countered those potential criticisms of rational inquiry within a religious context.
Exactly. It's like saying, look, our individual minds are limited, right? We need this collaborative effort, this philosophical tradition to really grasp the truth.
And it resonated. I mean, the proemium, that opening section, it pops up everywhere. Not just in philosophy, but theology, literature, you name it.
Totally. And that metaphor of the bat's eyes, the intellect struggling to see the most knowable things, that also gained traction. It was almost like a meme, but like a really intellectually rich meme.
Right. And what's fascinating is how it was adapted and used in different ways. You can see how it reflects these evolving ideas about what philosophy actually was within this tradition.
Yeah. It's so nuanced, and then there's the sheer volume of metaphysical works produced in Arabic during this period. It's wild, like translations, commentaries, original treatises. It's a testament to the sheer intellectual energy that the metaphysics sparked.
A huge outpouring of thought. And it's not just about quantity either. It's about the quality of this engagement, like the emergence of what we might call a distinctly Arabic contribution to metaphysics, this new standard.
Yeah, the new standard. I love that. So, as good philosophical analysts here, let's unpack that a bit. What did that actually entail?
It's about this move towards a more comprehensive and systematically organized metaphysics. one that's also like epistemologically refined. You see thinkers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina not just translating and commenting, but synthesizing, sharpening these conceptual tools, clarifying definitions, building more rigorous arguments.
So it's like taking those raw materials and crafting something new, something more architecturally sound.
Exactly. And this new standard, it becomes this cornerstone of philosophy in the Arabic and Islamic world. And its influence extends even further. It's a genuine second beginning that shapes later philosophical developments in other traditions.
Like Aristotle laid the foundation, but these Arabic philosophers, they built upon it. Like Al-Farabi, he places ontology, the study of being, before philosophical theologies. That's huge. It prioritizes understanding existence as the groundwork for understanding the divine.
Totally. It's this rearticulation driven by this new intellectual environment, this commitment to rigorous philosophical inquiry. And it's bound to create some friction, right? When you've got this powerful, refined metaphysics, it's going to bump up against other ways of knowing, especially revealed theology.
That's a great point. It raises all these questions about the relationship between reason and faith. Like when you've got this sophisticated, rational account of reality and the divine, it's going to challenge non-philosophical approaches. And the impact wasn't just confined to the Islamic world.
Right. It ripples out to Latin Christian thought, Hebrew Jewish thought. It's this really far-reaching philosophical consequence.
So this Arabic second beginning really shakes things up. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at how these thinkers actually engaged with the metaphysics. It's a dense text, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't a uniform reception at all.
No, not at all. There were these three main approaches that emerge. The first, the taxonomical approach. It's all about classifying the content of the metaphysics, figuring out where it fits within Aristotle's work and within the whole system of knowledge.
It's like philosophical map making, trying to understand the intellectual terrain.
Exactly. Then you've got the exegetical approach. This is where you get those commentaries. And they range from really literal verse-by-verse analysis to more expansive interpretations.
So some sticking close to the text, others branching out into these broader philosophical discussions.
And then the third approach, adaptation. This is where you get philosophers taking those core doctrines from the metaphysics and reformulating them, creating these original treatises, building on those foundations, but going in new directions.
So not just passively reading and repeating, but actively engaging, interpreting, constructing new frameworks.
Right. And it's important to note that all the major figures who dealt with metaphysics during this period, they engaged with metaphysics through one or more of these approaches. It was this constant point of reference.
Now, within these approaches, you start to see certain doctrinal debates emerging. What were some of the key issues that these Arabic interpreters, engaging as fellow philosophers, what did they really grapple with?
Yeah, the three that really stand out. The first is the whole question of the scientific configuration of metaphysics. Like, what is its subject matter? Is it philosophical theology, the divine, ontology, being qua, being, or maybe both?
So really defining the scope and nature of metaphysics as a philosophical discipline.
Right. And their analysis wasn't limited to just the metaphysics itself. They were working with what they considered the whole Aristotelian corpus, including works like Euclid's Elements, Ptolemy's Almagest, and even pseudo-Aristotelian texts that were really influential, like the Theologia Aristotelis and the Liber de Causis.
So a broader philosophical context than just Aristotle alone. And a lot of Neoplatonic influence in there too, right? With that idea of emanation from a single source.
Absolutely. And that leads to the second major area of debate, the investigation of specific doctrines within the metaphysics. Like in ontology, they were really digging into the nature of being qua being, essence, form, substance, universals, all that good stuff. And then in cosmology, the big questions were around the eternity versus the origination of the world and how the first principle brought everything into being. Was it emanation, creation ex nihilo?
The age-old questions. And they had huge implications for their overall philosophical systems, too, depending on the answers they landed on.
For sure. And the third area was philosophical theology itself. Aristotle's concept of the unmoved mover was huge EE. They really scrutinized its unity, necessity, its intellectual nature. All these different interpretations emerged.
And all of this was happening against the backdrop of this really significant third issue, the relationship between this rational philosophical theology and Islamic belief.
Right. It was this ongoing attempt to reconcile the philosophical conception of God with the Islamic understanding of God. And these Arabic philosophers were operating under this assumption of the oneness of truth. So reason and revelation had to ultimately be compatible.
And you can see how this puts metaphysics into a kind of conversation, even a opposition with Islamic theology.
Totally. It's like offering an alternative framework.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is how these three doctrinal concerns are all intertwined. Like your view of metaphysics as a science or your stance on ontology or cosmology, it could affect how you saw the relationship between metaphysics and Islamic thought.
Right. Like if you saw metaphysics primarily as philosophical theology and it aligned well with Islamic doctrines, that might strengthen the perceived harmony. But if you emphasized ontology and things seemed to clash a bit, that could lead to tension.
Exactly. So to really trace this evolution, we need to look at the chronological development of this tradition. Our sources point to these 7 key periods, all culminating in the work of Ibn Sina or Avicenna, who's, kind of a watershed moment for Arabic metaphysics.
Let's start at the beginning then, the translation movement. It seems like that laid the groundwork for everything that followed.
It was the foundation. It happened over a few centuries, from the 9th to the 11th. And we're talking continuous translation of the metaphysics. And it wasn't just one version. Multiple translations popped up, sometimes using Syriac as a middle ground.
So not a static one-time thing, more like this dynamic, ongoing process.
Right. And the translations varied in style and scope, some trying to get the whole thing, some focusing on specific books. And the approaches differed too, sometimes word for word, sometimes more paraphrastic. But the goal was clear, to make the metaphysics accessible to Arabic-speaking intellectuals. And over time, there was this push towards more faithful and precise translations. Book Lambda, the one on philosophical theology, got a lot of attention. Multiple translations, revisions. I mean, that makes sense given the interest in the divine. But here's the thing. It wasn't just the metaphysics itself that was translated.
Oh, I bet you're going to say the commentaries too.
You got it. The major Greek commentaries, they got translated as well. Alexander of Aphrodisias, the Mystius, potentially Syrianus too, though that one's a bit more debated. But the point is, these Arabic readers, they weren't just reading Aristotle in isolation. They had access to this whole tradition of Greek interpretation.
So they were plugged into this broader conversation from the start.
Exactly. And it gets even wider. You have related works by other big names in the Greek tradition, Theophrastus, Nicholas of Damascus, Alexander, even John Philoponus. So it's this vast intellectual heritage that they're drawing on. And it really shaped how they approach the metaphysics.
It's mind-blowing when you think about the scale of this translation movement. And it sets the stage for the emergence of these key figures, starting with Al-Kindi and his school. So how did they approach the metaphysics within this new intellectual landscape?
Al-Kindi, often considered the first philosopher in the Arabic tradition, he mostly used this taxonomical approach, drawing on a lot of Neoplatonic ideas. In his work on the quantity of Aristotle's books, he gives this interesting take on the place of the metaphysics within Aristotle's philosophy. He sees it as both the culmination of theoretical philosophy, coming after logic and physics and such, but also as a kind of intro to ethics, which is practical philosophy.
It's a bit of an unusual position for what we now consider such a central metaphysical text.
It is. And his description of the metaphysics itself is pretty limited. He focuses mainly on philosophical theology. And in his discussions, he explicitly connects these philosophical concepts back to Islamic beliefs, like the oneness of God, divine attributes, providence, and stuff like that.
So right from the start, he's trying to bridge the gap between Greek thought and Islamic thought.
Exactly. We don't have a dedicated commentary from him on the metaphysics, but from what we do have, it seems like he used a lot of paraphrase and paid special attention to that opening book, Alpha Elaton, as a lead-in to the theological themes in Lambda.
And his big metaphysical treatise, the book on first philosophy, what's going on there in terms of his engagement with Aristotle?
Monotheism is front and center. He really stresses the absolute unity of God. And his model of the God-world relationship is very Neoplatonic. Lots of echoes of those pseudo-Aristotelian texts we talked about. He's also into creation in time, which is a view that John Philoponus championed. And it's interesting because while he starts by praising Aristotle and paraphrasing bits of Alpha Elaton, he quickly shifts to themes from Lambda, though not always in a way that's super faithful to Aristotle.
So he's picking and choosing, focusing on those theological aspects and filtering it all through this Neoplatonic and Islamic lens.
Right. He wants to show that Greek metaphysics and Islamic revelation are compatible. For him, philosophy, especially metaphysics, is a way to unpack and explain the prophetic message. And this idea, this view of metaphysics as the science of the divine, it's shared by his students and the broader school he influenced.
So the early reception is very much geared towards theological interpretations and harmonizing with Islamic beliefs. Then we get Abd ibn Qura. How does he compare to Al-Kindi?
Ibn Qura, he's late 9th, early 10th century. He might have revised the translation of Themistius's paraphrase of Lambda. But what's really cool is he wrote what we think is the first extant Arabic commentary specifically on the metaphysics. And like Al-Kindi, he zeroes in on Book Lambda and its theological stuff.
So philosophical theology is still the main attraction.
Yeah, and he's also big on showing how it fits with Islamic monotheism. One God, divine will in creation, all that.
Mm-hmm.
He even buys into that Neoplatonic idea from Porphyry that Plato and Aristotle were basically in agreement. But here's where he diverges from Al-Kindi. Ibn Corda was all about the eternity of the world. He straight up rejected Philoponus' arguments for creation and time, and he relied way less on explicitly Neoplatonic texts. So his background seems more directly rooted in Aristotle himself.
That's a big difference on the eternity question. Has major implications for how you see God in the universe. And what about Aristotle's philosophical theology? Did he tweak that at all?
He did. Like, he saw the first mover not just as the cause of motion, like Aristotle did, but as the cause of existence itself.
So more fundamental, not just what keeps things moving, but what makes them exist in the first place. Okay, now let's jump to Al-Farabi. He's considered one of the most important figures from this period. What's his deal with the metaphysics?
Al-Farabi, he's 10th century, and he takes a more systematic, more traditional approach. He gives these overviews of Aristotle's works, placing the metaphysics within that larger framework. But he also develops these detailed taxonomic accounts, like relating the metaphysics to the rest of Aristotle, but also to the whole system of philosophical and Islamic sciences. He really spells this out in his book, Enumeration of the Sciences.
So a much broader view of where metaphysics fits into the intellectual landscape.
Right. And in that work, he presents metaphysics as this distinct discipline. It's got its own method, demonstration, and a clear structure. And crucially, he puts ontology, being qua being, before philosophical theology. Now, the exact place of metaphysics in his various classifications, it kind of shifts around. Sometimes it's like the peak of all theoretical knowledge.
Sounds like he really valued metaphysical inquiry.
Oh, yeah. He also wrote this cool little intro to the metaphysics called On the Goals of the Sage. It's considered the first surviving integral exegesis in Arabic. And here he's really drawing on the posterior analytics that work on epistemology. He's bringing this methodological rigor to his interpretation of Aristotle.
So a more grounded, more epistemologically savvy approach.
Totally. And he's pushing back against those overly Neoplatonic or narrowly monotheistic readings of Aristotle, probably thinking of Al-Kindi and his crew. He favors interpretations that are more in line with folks like Alexander and Themistius. He's saying, look, metaphysics is about being qua being. It's universal. Philosophical theology is just one part of it.
It's a shift away from a purely God-focused metaphysics to something broader, more fundamental.
Exactly. He even derives, like, the scope, the unity, the name, the whole content of metaphysics from this idea of it being about being qua being. And in his descriptions of each book, he avoids bringing in religious stuff. It's all about the philosophical arguments. He's building this ideal science of metaphysics based on how he reads Aristotle. And it had a big influence on later thinkers, especially Ibn Sina.
Then he wrote on other metaphysical stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah. His Book of Letters dives into ontology. On one, and Unity tackles themes from Book Iota of the Metaphysics. He even re-examines the whole eternity debate, refuting Philoponus' arguments.
Right.
And there's this debated work, the book on the agreement of the opinions of the two sages, which is about, you guessed it, reconciling Plato and Aristotle.
Right.
But ultimately, Al-Farabi is saying that metaphysics, because it's so broad and uses this demonstrative method, it can't be reduced to Islamic doctrine, even though there might be some overlap.
So drawing a line between philosophy and religion, but acknowledging the potential for points of contact. Okay, now let's talk about the Baghdad Aristotelians. Who were these folks, and what did they bring to the table?
The Baghdad Aristotelians, they were mostly Christian scholars, 10th and 11th centuries. And they were all about continuing this tradition of commentary on Aristotle that had its roots in Alexandria. Some key players were Abu Bishr Mata, Yahya ibn Ade, Isa ibn Zura, and Abu al-Faraq ibn al-Ayyib.
It's interesting to see this Greek tradition being carried on in a totally different cultural and religious setting.
Totally. They did a lot of translation work on the metaphysics and the commentaries, too. And they were known for these super literal commentaries like Alexander of Aphrodisias, close textual analysis, detailed explanations, all that. We know Abu Bishr Mata wrote commentaries on a bunch of books, and we still have Yahya ibn Adi's commentary on Alpha Elaton. And Abu al-Faraq ibn al-Ayyib's was famous for being really long in detail.
So really focus on explaining the text as it was written. Did their Christianity show up at all in their interpretations?
It seems so, yeah. Yaqi ibn Adi He kind of snuck in some religious concerns. Some of his theories, like his idea of divine forms, seem like he's trying to work some Platonism into Aristotle, maybe reflecting his Christian beliefs.
So even within this literal approach, there's room for outside influences. Okay, now the big one. Ibn Sina, or Avicenna. This guy's a giant. How does he tackle this whole metaphysics legacy?
Avicenna is like the master synthesizer. He lays out his understanding of metaphysics in a bunch of works, but his summi, those big encyclopedias, that's where his real adaptation of Aristotle shines.
He wrote a ton, didn't he? So where does metaphysics fit in?
It's a key part of all his summi. Logic, natural philosophy, and metaphysics. That's the core trio of theoretical philosophy. Usually it goes logic, natural philosophy, math, then metaphysics. But in his Persian Summa, the philosophy for Allah, and maybe in his lost Eastern philosophy, he flips it. Metaphysics comes first.
Whoa, that's a bold move. Why the switch up?
He's saying both orders are valid, but highlight different things. Metaphysics comes last in learning because you need that foundation from other disciplines. But it's first in reality because it's about those ultimate principles.
Makes sense. The most fundamental stuff might be the hardest to grasp at first.
Right. We don't have most of his literal commentaries, including any specifically on the metaphysics, sadly. But we know they were concise, selective. But where he really shines is in how he adapts the metaphysics in his summa. It's this brilliant blend of those taxonomical and exegetical approaches, but updated for his time.
He's not just commenting, he's reshaping the whole field.
Totally. He gives metaphysics this precise place in his system of philosophy. He explains Aristotle by weaving his text into his own writing, sometimes tweaking it, rearranging things. And he adapts its content to meet new epistemological standards. Post-Aristotelian progress, the Islamic context, he takes it all into account.
So a major overhaul informed by both history and his own context. And his Book of the Cure, that's his biggest work, right? Especially that metaphysics section, the science of divine things.
Yeah, it's a classic summa, but that's what makes his adaptation so clear. And it's unique in a couple of ways. It includes a whole section on math before metaphysics and puts practical philosophy after it. Metaphysics is right in the center.
And how does he handle the actual text of the metaphysics itself?
He uses different translations, and his quoting style is pretty loose. Sometimes it's brief allusions, sometimes it's longer and closer to paraphrase, especially when he's dealing with key arguments like from Alpha 2 and Lambda 610. He'll add his own explanations and defenses.
He's not afraid to make Aristotle work for him.
Not at all. And in the Science of Divine Things, he makes three big changes to Aristotle's metaphysics. The form, meaning its scientific profile, the content, how it's arranged and what it's trying to say, and its overall systemic function, its place in his whole system of philosophy.
Okay, let's break this down. Starting with form, how does he change that?
He makes metaphysics line up with the posterior analytics. That's Aristotle's work on epistemology, how we know what we know. Avicenna shows that this subject matter of metaphysics, like the first causes, being qua, being immaterial substances, all that, it fits the criteria for a true science, according to Aristotle's own definition. He harmonizes different views within Aristotle to create a clear, consistent subject matter. And that's huge EE, because it solves this debate about how metaphysics can be both ontology and philosophical theology. He gives it a clearer structure based on the parts, properties, and principles of its subject matter. And he's all about demonstration, like using logic and reasoning to prove things, just like the posterior analytics emphasizes.
So metaphysics gets a major epistemological upgrade.
Right. And in terms of content, he reorders the books of the metaphysics in the Science of Divine Things. And he might even leave out Book Kappa, which is this tricky one that people debate about. But it's more than just reordering. He brings in ideas from other Aristotelian writings, from the whole peripatetic tradition, Greek and Arabic, and even his own cultural context. Like in his philosophical theology, he talks about God in ways that would resonate with his Muslim audience. He's showing how philosophy and Islam can fit together. And crucially, he introduces his own big ideas, like the distinction between essence and existence, which is like his signature move, and his own proof for God's existence, which is based on his understanding of metaphysics and causation.
Yeah, essence and existence, that's core Avicenna. How does that play out?
It's everywhere. It's the basis for his distinction between thing and existent. It shapes his theory of universals, and it leads to his idea of God as the only being whose essence existence. Like there's no distinction for God between what he is and that he is. And his proof for God's existence, it all hinges on this framework, too.
And what about the systemic function of metaphysics? Where does it fit in the grand scheme of things?
For Avicenna, it's at the top. It's the queen of the sciences. It provides the principles for all the other sciences. It puts everything in order. It's the foundation. Universal ontology. It's also the judge of logical laws, universal concepts, and the principles of specific sciences. It even proves the existence of the subject matters of other sciences.
Metaphysics does it all. So basically, Avicenna brings together all these trends from the Arabic tradition.
He does. His philosophical theology blends elements from Al-Kindi, the Baghdad Aristotelians, Al-Farabi, and even some Neoplatonism. He balances the focus on God with the importance of ontology, and he manages to be both rigorous and faithful to the metaphysics.
So Avicenna leaves this huge legacy. What happens in the aftermath? Does everyone just follow his lead?
Well, he kind of becomes the new standard. His metaphysics takes over from Aristotle's metaphysics as the main text people study and comment on. But the debates don't stop. People keep arguing about essence and existence, about his philosophical theology. His influence goes in a lot of different directions. Some directly follow him, some adapt his ideas into new systems. He gets integrated into Illuminationism, Sufism, even Islamic theology itself.
So a lot of different interpretations and reactions.
Exactly, and even his critics are indebted to him. His system becomes the benchmark.
He sets the terms of the debate.
Totally. And his metaphysics continues to be influential in different parts of the Islamic world. Persia, India, the Ottoman Empire. And the Book of Pointers and Reminders and the Science of Divine Things, they're key to spreading his ideas. No one work captures all of Avicenna, but the Science of Divine Things, with all the manuscripts and commentaries, it shows how influential he remained, especially in Iran during the Safavid period.
So Avicenna's impact really echoes through history. So to wrap this up for our philosopher listeners, what are the big takeaways from this whole journey of the metaphysics?
It's a case study in how a foundational text can be engaged with, not just passively, but actively, critically, creatively, and how that engagement can spark new insights, new debates, and even reshape a whole field. It shows that second beginning in action, and its impact on the history of thought is undeniable.
Totally. And it shows how interconnected philosophy is across cultures. So for our listeners, here's a final thought. How does this story, this movement of ideas across borders, inform how we understand metaphysics today? What does it tell us about truth, about inquiry? What can we learn from this cross-cultural exchange?
It makes us think about how our context shapes our understanding, and how engaging with different perspectives can transform even our most basic ideas.
Absolutely. And we encourage everyone to explore these figures and texts further. This deep dive is just a starting point. There's a whole world of fascinating stuff out there waiting to be discovered.